Good morning. Good wintry morning. I'm thinking about last winter when there was no snow, never got very cold. I say, bah humbug to that kind of winter. I say yay to cold, the way Vermont is supposed to be in the winter, and yay to snow, the way it's supposed to be. It's comforting in a way. Like, maybe everything will be all right with the world after all. Not so much to ice do I say yay, though. Welcome to this Sunday morning worship service at the Champlain Valley Unitarian Universalist Society. Whoever you are, whatever your beliefs, your way of being, you are welcome here. We are a strong and caring community, bounded together by love, committed both to nurturing our own and each other's spiritual well-being, and to working together in the larger community to build a better world. We gather today on land known as Ndakina to the Nulhagen Abenaki tribe. For these Abenaki, this time of year is the greeting moon, when we are invited to greet human and non-human relations with a request for forgiveness. Forgive me for any wrong I have done to you. Forgive me for any wrong I have done to you. May we receive that forgiveness with generosity and pledge to not add to the suffering of the native peoples of this land. My name is Abi Sessions, and I'm a member of this congregation and the worship team. Along with many others, I have worked to co-create this worship experience today. It is my honor and pleasure to serve as worship associate today for the Reverend Mara Dowdall, who was with us in December, just a few short weeks ago. She is a UU minister who lives in Burlington. She's currently the chaplain for the UVM Medical Center, and recently became the bereavement coordinator at Porter Hospital. We're so happy to have her back with us today with her son Cassidy. Did I get that name right? Cassidy, sitting in the front row. Now please join me in the words of the chalice lighting as Wayne Sponheimer, recently come to us from Iowa, lights the chalice. May the light we now kindle inspire us to use our powers to heal and not to harm, to help and not to hinder, to bless and not to curse, and to serve one another.
The words of Bill Schultz. Come into this place of peace and let its silence heal your spirit. Come into this place of memory and let its history warm your soul. Come into this place of prophecy and power and let its vision change your heart. Come, let us worship together. And now, come, let us sing together again. Rise and body your spirit, and we're going to sing, Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing. We are now going to have a time for all ages, and I understand there have been different customs in the congregation about whether young folk come forward or stay where you are. So I guess I would just like to invite forward anyone who is feeling especially young at heart today, or young, or maybe can see better, if you want to come forward up here or to this front row. Can everyone see me where you are? Okay, we're good. I'm getting nods. Okay, we're going to go with it. So the story today comes from the Jewish tradition, and it was in a book by Rabbi Lawrence Kushner. And he said that he had learned the story from one of his rabbinical memories, and so on the story goes back. So the story is that long ago and far away in a village, there was a synagogue, which is a place where Jewish people in the village would come to worship on Saturday. And in this village, there was a very, very wealthy man. He owned like a lot of properties in the village. His name was written on certain things because he donated a lot of money to places. And he was a good member of the community, and he went dutifully to his synagogue every Saturday, but he was often to be found sleeping in the back row. Are there any sleepers here? I'm at a life stage where I'm like, whatever you need to do is great. If you rest through my sermon, then that is what you need to be doing today. But at any rate, the wealthy man was sleeping as usual, but he woke up for just a minute. And during the minute he semi-woke up, the rabbi was reading a portion of a text from Leviticus in which God is commanding someone to bring 12 loaves of bread to be laid on an altar as an offering to God. And when the wealthy man woke up at the end of the service, he had this weird experience. You know, when you're kind of waking and you hear something and you're not sure if it's a dream or real, but he thought, my goodness, I have received a message from God. And God told me to bring 12 loaves of bread as an offering. And that seems a little strange. I could bring a bigger offering, 12 loaves of bread, but I guess I better do it. So he went home and he got his flour and he made 12 beautiful loaves of challah bread. And he brought them back to the synagogue, and he brought them to one of the most sacred places in the temple at the front, where the sacred text, the Torah, was. And he tucked the bread up there with the Torah. He left. And about an hour later, another person wandered into the synagogue. This was a gentleman who also lived in the village, and he didn't have a permanent place to live. Sometimes he slept with neighbors, or sometimes he slept in barns, and he would sometimes spend the day at the temple because it was warm and the door was open. And that day he wandered to the front and he offered up some prayers. And his prayers that day were about how hard it was, how his life was hard and how he was often hungry and how he was often having to ask his neighbors for help. And when he opened his eyes, he looked up toward where the Torah was and he saw something funny. Is that 12 loaves of challah bread? That's not normally where the food was on offering to take. And he looked around and he thought, this must be what I've prayed for. God has put these loaves of bread there for me. So he took out his bag and he put in the challahs and he left. Now, the next Saturday, the wealthy man in the village came for regular services, and he snuck up to the front before everything got going, and the challahs were gone. And he thought, God has accepted my offering. This is amazing. And I even feel better than when I give a big sum of money. And he said, I think I'm going to get fancy with my challahs. We're going to do raisin challahs next week, and I'm going to ask my neighbors for their best challah recipe. And so sure enough, the next week, raisin challah it was. And then his neighbor in the village came in on his regular day to hang out and warm in the synagogue, and he snuck in, and sure enough, God had left him 12 raisin challahs. It was a miracle. And so this went for several months. And one day, the rabbi of the temple was having a hard day. It was stressful. It was budget season at the temple. He was like, oi, I'm going to go in, and he just sat back and he was going to have some quiet time. And he settled himself at the back and was doing some breathing and some talking with God. And he noticed the strangest thing. The wealthiest member of his congregation tiptoed in with a large bag. And the rabbi decided, what is going on? I'm going to be quiet and see what's happening. And he observed the man go forward and one by one take out 12 loaves of challah bread and place them at the ark where the Torah was. The rabbi was a little bit confounded, but he'd seen stranger things in his day. So he just continued staying in the back, and a couple hours later, another member of the congregation came in. This was the man that the rabbi knew was really struggling. And he watched him go forward and take the 12 loaves of challah. And the rabbi thought, this is amazing. I need to introduce these two to each other so they know what they're doing. So the rabbi, he made this happen. He texted. He got the meeting organized. He brought them to his office, and these were not two people that were normally together. And the rabbi was excited. I've got to tell you something. You, Mr. Wealthy Man, wealthiest man in the village, you have been bringing challahs. And you, my neighbor, my friend, you who are struggling, you have been receiving the challahs, and you didn't know it all along. And then the rabbi looked at their faces, and instead of seeing excitement or joy or something, he saw disappointment. And the rabbi said, why are you disappointed? And the wealthy man said, well, Rabbi, I thought this was my offering to God. I thought God was taking the challahs. And the man who was struggling, who didn't have housing, said, and I thought God's self, was providing me with challahs. They said this wasn't the miracle we thought. And the rabbi thought for a minute, and he said, no, this is still a miracle. And he looked at this wealthy man and he said, your hands are the hands of God baking the bread. And he turned to the other man and he said, yours are the hands of God receiving it. And that is our story for today. And who is ready for some challah bread? Getting a little hungry here. So I believe we're going to sing forth Children. Is that the plan? Okay. And what are we singing? This little light of mine. Okay. Thank you.
There are many pathways to connection in our congregation, both within the congregation and with the larger community. First, I'd like to highlight two within the congregation by thanking the 20 or so people who showed up yesterday to be trained with Mark Ewart as stewards of the congregation, ramping up to the Roots and Wings campaign in support of our financial needs. Thank you, those of you who spent a Saturday morning with us. And I want to draw your attention to the meeting today after worship here in the sanctuary, I believe, where the Finance Committee will present the first draft of the budget for next year. It's a good way to get involved with the congregation. And then this weekend, Help Over Hate is the slogan for some service projects in honor of Martin Luther King Jr. Making meals for Gather, Middlebury's drop-in living room, sponsored by the Bread Loaf Zen community. And then deep cleaning at Gather on Monday afternoon. This is an important community service that's well supported by the CVUUS community. And then I'll draw your attention to everything on the back of your order of service. Many opportunities for connection. And now we will take the offering, which we will share this week, as we have for the whole month of January, with the NAACP branch office in Rutland. Thank you. I have 2 yellow cards. One from Marnie Wood. Yesterday, one of our steadfast founders, Ann Ross, celebrated her birthday where she resides at Eastview here in Middlebury. Ann's viewing us on Zoom this morning. I know Ann has been an important inspiration for members of this congregation. We're grateful for her presence in the life of CVUUS since we began in the mid-'80s. Some of you know that our fellowship hall downstairs is named the Ann Ross Fellowship Hall. in tribute to Anne's long and steadfast endeavors. Sing. Anytime, Hannah. The second card is from Ellen Flight. She says, in appreciation for the embrace of this congregation during my grief journey, recently with the death of my mother in December, along with earlier deaths of my brother and dad, the literal embraces, phone calls, notes, and nods have helped me now, and I imagine as I work to move forward. As many of you know, grief is not a straight path or without its ups and downs, and it lasts months and years. CVUUS has been a central part of my life, and so while not surprised by the support, I want to share how much it means to me. Thank you. From Ellen. Namara will introduce meditation with a reading.
Let us hold those beautiful sharings of this community and all the milestones and the joys and the sorrows and the passages of our lives gently as we begin this meditation. I bring you the words of Reverend Christine Robinson, and this is a meditation on our hands. Let us find a space of quiet and peace to notice ourselves here in this room. The chair holding us, the ground holding us, the earth holding us. And I invite you to become aware of your hands. These hands have been through so much life. They have strengths, scars, sunspots, beauty. I invite you to consider that your hands do the work of love in the world. These hands may hold another's hands. These hands may type emails to politicians, sign cards of consolation and congratulations. They may teach. They may quilt. They might write words urging peace. They may bathe children, feed elders, nurse the ill, work the earth, organize communities, dig gardens, prepare food. These hands may clasp in prayer, open in release, grasp in solidarity, clench in righteous protest. These hands are love's hands, Spirit's hands, your hands, our hands together. A great mystery of embodied love. These are the hands that God has. Let us be together in a moment of silence. Blessed be.
I'd like to let you know what we are singing this morning. It is a piece written by Patsy Ford Sims. The text is in English and Swahili. It's called Amani Utupe, Grant Us Peace, Give Us Courage.
That was wonderful. Thank you, choir. Our reading this morning comes from This I Believe, a long-running radio series that NPR revived for 4 years in the early part of the 21st century. It's an essay called Always Go to the Funeral by a woman named Deirdre Sullivan. Sullivan grew up in Syracuse, New York, and traveled the world working odd jobs before attending law school at Northwestern University. She lives now in New York City. Always go to the funeral. I believe in always going to the funeral. My father taught me that. The first time he said it directly to me, I was 16 and trying to get out of going to calling hours for Miss Emerson, my old 5th grade math teacher. I did not want to go. My father was unequivocal. Dee, he said, you're going. Always go to the funeral. Do it for the family. So my dad waited outside while I went in. It was worse than I thought it would be. I was the only kid there. When the condolence line deposited me in front of Miss Emerson's shell-shocked parents, I stammered out, "Sorry about all this," and stalked away. But for that deeply weird expression of sympathy, delivered 20 years ago, Miss Emerson's mother still remembers my name and always says hello with tearing eyes. That was the first time I went unchaperoned. But my parents had been taking us kids to funerals and calling hours as a matter of course for years. By the time I was 16, I had been to 5 or 6 funerals. I remember 2 things from the funeral circuit: bottomless dishes of free mints, and my father saying on the ride home, "You can't come in without going out, kids. Always go to the funeral." It sounds simple. When someone dies, get in your car and go to calling hours or the funeral. That I can do. But I think a personal philosophy of going to funerals means more than that. Always go to the funeral means I have to do the right thing when I really, really don't feel like it. I have to remind myself of it when I could make some small gesture. But I don't really have to, and I definitely don't want to. I'm talking about those things that represent only inconvenience to me, but the world to the other guy. You know, the painfully under-attended birthday party, the hospital visit during happy hour, the Shiva call for one of my ex's uncles. In my humdrum life, the daily battle hasn't been good versus evil. It's hardly so epic. Most days, my real battle is doing good versus doing nothing. In going to funerals, I've come to believe that while I wait to make a grand heroic gesture, I should just stick to the small inconveniences that let me share in life's inevitable, occasional calamity. On a cold April night 3 years ago, my father died a quiet death from cancer. His funeral was on a Wednesday, middle of the work week. I had been numb for days when, for some reason during the funeral, I turned and looked back at the folks in the church. The memory of it still takes my breath away. The most human, powerful and humbling thing I've ever seen was a church at 3 o'clock on a Wednesday, full of inconvenienced people who believe in going to the funeral.
Thank you, Abi. I'm going to need to actually blow my nose now. There's nothing worse than having to blow your nose in a pulpit. On a warm spring evening, many, many moons ago, I extended my hand to my friend Julia, who took it in her hands and then smudged my palm with dark black ink. We were 8 divinity school friends on a retreat together. We were ministers-to-be, and we were hot off many classes about leading rituals. And we'd gathered for a small little worship just after sundown. And the ink was part of a ritual one of my friends in our small study group had thought up for us to affirm our commitments to our just starting out ministries. By extending our hands, we were signaling our intention to use them, and by symbolic extension, our whole selves for the good of those we would serve. And by blotting our palms with ink, we were symbolizing metaphorically that we knew the work of ministry, of serving our fellow humans, is not always neat and tidy, that it is often messy, or to put it as the poet Marge Piercy does, the work of the world is common as mud, botched, it smears the hands, crumbles to dust. Right before I offered my hand to Julia to be marked with this metaphorical mud, she said to me, "Mara, we are called to serve. Will you serve?" "Yes," I answered. "Yes." And I am asking all of us today, we are called to serve. Will you serve? Yes. Good, we are done. Let's throw out the rest of the sermon. All right, amen. Some 40 years before that gaggle of young UU clergy gathered, on a wintry February morning, much more like this one, a pastor who was relatively young in life's years, but ancient in life's experience, preached a variation of the same message and question. It was 1968. It was Atlanta, and the pulpit was Baptist. This country was in the midst of major upheaval. The war was raging in Vietnam, and here the Civil Rights Act had passed, and some of the conventions of our country were changing, albeit with violent resistance in some places. And in the midst of that time, in a city that was at the heart of that struggle, this young preacher said to the people that morning, "If you want to be important, wonderful. If you want to be recognized, wonderful. but recognize that he who is greatest among you shall be your servant. And that is a new definition of greatness. That preacher was the one and only Martin Luther King Jr., the pastor and the prophet, the martyr and the message bearer, whose work and legacy we are honoring today, tomorrow, every day of the year. And we do it no matter who is president. King spoke those words from the pulpit of Ebenezer Baptist Church, and it was a sermon called The Drum Major Instinct. You familiar with the Drum Major Instinct sermon? Okay, good. It's a little less familiar than I Have a Dream. But preachers want to get deep into the sermon canon here. So in King's interpretation, the drum major instinct is a basic human impulse to be recognized, to be seen, to be important. And King said that it's like the drum major at the front of the parade. You know, do we have any drum majors here? Is drum majoring still a thing? You were a drum major. Woohoo! All right. And King says in this sermon that, like, no matter how good a person you are, no matter how righteous and just no matter how virtuous you are, we all have this instinct, this need. It's part of being human. So his brilliant turn in the sermon is that we can't change that, but what we can do is direct that impulse in us to the good. We can choose to harness that desire for recognition, that desire to be great, to the end of serving other people. Or in the ancient words of the Passover Haggadah that we said together in our chalice lighting, we can use the power of the drum major instinct to heal and not to harm, to help and not to hinder, to bless and not to curse. If you want to be great, wonderful, but recognize that who is greatest among you shall be your servant. And that is a new definition of greatness. I first read those words of King in January of 2009, not long after my friend Julia smudged my palm with ink. And I was in the midst of searching for my first congregational call, which is what brought me to Vermont. And boy, was it a heady time of promise. We were about to inaugurate our first Black president. It was a big deal. Do you remember? Yeah, it was extraordinary. There was a slogan that was circulating then. You might remember it. Rosa sat so Martin could march. Martin marched so Obama could run. Obama ran so our children could fly. Ugh. When I say those words now, my heart aches. And I think of my children. And I think of all of our children. And my brain starts going, It's like I can't compute. 2009 was not that long ago. The days of heady promise has given way to January of 2025. And what are the words for this January? Do you have any? Disaster. What was the other? Dread is one of mine. Anybody else feel numb sometimes? Yeah. Earlier this week, my older son, not the one who's here, but the one I was telling you about in December, who likes to search things up on my phone as soon as he gets in the car, he had this like out of the blue realization. He said, "Mom, the inauguration is on MLK Day?" And he just like, his eyes were wide and he said, "That's awful." Like it was a personal affront to Dr. King. And I said, I know. It's awful. And then I got thinking, put on my little sermon preacher brain. And I knew I had to be here with you all this Sunday, and I thought, what special timing of a Sunday to sign up for? So I was not alive in 1968. I would come on the scene 10 years later, but many of you were alive in 1968 and remember it well. And from what I've heard, the state of the union and the condition of the world felt far from certain. Yes, there were not billionaire tech bros back then jockeying for influence, right? And there are things we're dealing with now that we hadn't seen then as humans. Lord knows we didn't have a special person named Donald Trump yet on the scene. But there was war. And there was injustice. And there was crippling poverty. And there were tyrants and crooks and oppressors with far too much power. And they were claiming the mantle of greatness. And it was in that kind of world that Dr. King preached his sermon. It was not we're inaugurating the first African-American president world. It was a different world. And it was in that world that he preached, recognize that he who is greatest among you will be your servant. It is precisely when we feel unsure what to do, when we feel like there is much we can't do, when we feel like the powerful are making a mockery of this beautiful world, when we feel like my son Dean did and does, it's awful. There is something we can do. There is something we can always do. We can serve. Can we say that together? We can serve. This is ancient business. This is not 21st century business or even 20th century business. This is ancient human business. The call to service goes back to the oldest spiritual teachings. It is in our Jewish and Christian scriptures from which King drank. He drank from those waters. In fact, his drum major instinct sermon came out of his interpretation of the Gospel of Mark, in which Jesus says to two of the disciples, "Whosoever will be greatest among you shall be your servant, and whosoever of you will be chiefest shall be servant of all." And it is the message that we hear in those words in Matthew's Gospel, the part of the Bible that some people conveniently forget. "For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to see me." Feeding the hungry, welcoming the stranger, visiting the sick. This is what the prophets say to do, the ancient ones and the modern ones. And when I think about it, I notice something. These are not miraculous accomplishments. These are not grand, heroic gestures. And isn't that what Deirdre Sullivan was getting at in her beautiful essay that Abi read us? Her philosophy of life, her going to the funeral idea is that we make those small gestures rather than the big ones. We do the things that would just be an inconvenience to us, but that are everything to someone else. We persist in doing good versus doing nothing. I think that's as good a definition of service as I know. Doing something good when you could do nothing. And here I suspect that I am just preaching to the converted. Like any of you could be up here with me delivering this sermon, right? This is also the heart of our UU faith. We are united in doing acts of love. That's what brings us together, not necessarily a particular version of the deity. And also, as UUs, our salvation theology is not that we're serving now to achieve something in the afterlife. It's that we are doing something now to bring heaven here, the beloved community on earth. And that we are the hands of love. We are the hands of the holy. We are the hands of God, whatever language you choose in the world. And the rabbi reminds us of that in the story, right? I think sometimes it's easy to forget that the sacrament of service is a two-way street, especially for those of us who either by our vocation or by our temperament or by our church affiliation do a lot of helping of others, right? But for those of us who are used to helping, our challenge may not so much be in serving others, but in opening ourselves to be served. But as I see it, the life of service means not just lending our hand to someone, but also letting someone else inconvenience themselves on our behalf. This week, I have been helping a friend of mine. I met her when I worked at the Burlington Library for about 8 months, and this friend of mine was a die-hard patron, like every day in the library, dispensing dark chocolate to those of us at the circulation desk. That gets you into the VIP level of patronage. My friend is going through a tough time, health challenges and not a lot of support, and I have stepped up to help. And it's been hard for my friend because she is used to helping others, right? And I had to say, my friend, if I am lucky to make it to 89, I'm going to need some help too. This is a circle of helping and connection, right? And Deirdre Sullivan gets at that too in her essay. Because after a lifetime of going to other people's families' funerals, she feels that deep gratitude when she turns around and sees all those people showing up for her. And that's what I think is at the heart of the call to service from King. We are people who serve, and we are people who are served in turn. And if we remember that we are all humans, that we are all vulnerable, that we are all and each at some point the least of these, then we can serve out of a spirit of shared love and justice that connects us. Later in this week, I went to see my friend, and I was coming in out of the cold. And I went into her apartment and I sat down next to her. and I gave her my hands, like I'd given my friend Julia my hand those years ago. And she held my hands, and she said, "Those are really cold." And I told her, yes, in my family we call them ice paws. Don't touch me with your ice paws. And my friend held them, and she warmed them in hers. And in that moment, she was serving me in kind. In 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. closed the Drum Major Instinct sermon by saying that at his funeral, he did not want his eulogizers to say that he was a Nobel Prize recipient or that he had won awards. He didn't even know what was to come of his accolades. He preached that he would like them to say this instead: I'd like somebody to mention that day that Martin Luther King Jr. tried to give his life serving others. I'd like for somebody that day to say that Martin Luther King Jr. tried to love somebody. I want them to say that I did try to feed the hungry. I want them to say that I did try in my life to visit those who were sick. I want them to say I tried to love and serve humanity. And indeed, when King was laid to rest only 2 months after he preached those words, this sermon was played at his funeral, where rows of inconvenienced people gladly filled the pews. If you want to be great, wonderful, but recognize that she who is greatest among you shall be your servant. And that is a new definition of greatness. We are called to serve. Will you serve? Yes. Because in the words of an old hymn, when we all serve one another, then our heaven is begun. May it be so now, in January of 2025, and in the days to come. Amen. Our final song, thank you, is Love Will Guide Us, number 130. 131, but here. Love will guide us, Jesus guide us, go inside us, lead the way, on the road from grace to healing. Love will guide us. let us join together in the words as we extinguish the chalice. They're in the order of service. Oh, there they are. There they are. Yes. We extinguish this flame, remembering always to keep love at the center. Our closing words are from Rami Shapiro. We are loved by an unending love. We are embraced by arms that find us even when we are hidden from ourselves. We are touched by fingers that soothe us even when we are too proud for soothing. We are counseled by voices that guide us even when we are too angry to hear. We are supported by hands that uplift us even in the midst of a fall. We are loved by an unending love. Embraced, touched, counseled, supported. Ours are the arms, the fingers, the voices. Ours are the hands, the eyes, the smiles. We are loved by an unending love. Let us go in love as we buckle up. Amen. Thank you.